Yeah, sorry, Nick. All right, off to you. Let's do it. So tell me a little bit about DNR with Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Why does it require a different approach?
All right. Let's talk a little bit about normal cloud DNR and then talk about Kubernetes containerized DNR. So normal cloud DNR, you have your Google audit logs that you can collect from your GCP accounts. You have your localized syslog if you were running syslog daemons on your instances. You may not be because that's very large and expensive at times. Okay, you now have your AWS CloudTrail logs, which are the analog to the Google audit logs. All right, now you have your guard duty logs, DNS and C2 traffic logs. So far, we're getting logs about infrastructure at a discrete VM level, broadly speaking. Like there may be some exceptions there. Or we're not getting logs off of the pod from everything I just described. We are not. How do we get logs off of the pod that are contextualized to the state of the runtime workload running on that pod and at that point in time? This is the context that Sandeep talks about. You don't get that natively. You simply don't. You need a separate capability that allows you to have pod level runtime observability, a product like Falco, for example, or a product like Threat Mapper, that Threat Striker rather, as part of Threat Mapper family, that allows you to have workload context to say, okay, this pod on this cluster, let's say there's 32 pods in a cluster at a given time. Those pods might be doing different functionalities, right? You may have a multi-tenant cluster where you have, workload A could have 4 pods for the SMS sending service, and workload B could have 16 more pods for a authentication service, and they could be multi-tenant in that cluster. That's possible, right? That's how some companies do it. Not all companies have single tenant Kubernetes. Now, how do you get context on what those 4 uh, SMS sending use case pods are doing versus the 16 authentication handling pods are doing? You need pod level observability, and you simply don't get that out of the box. Regardless of how you're doing it, you need to build that capability in with the products that I described, or simply you just live in the dark. You don't have that. You don't know when the moldy pod comes into your house, to use your analogy. Uh, Sandeep, over to you to maybe provide a little bit more color.
No, absolutely. I think absolutely, Nick. Right? Context is the king. There's just no doubt about it. Nothing is actionable without it. And some of these specialized tools essentially add that depth that you need to be able to detect or call that you're detecting and actually responding to something. Really, right? So absolutely agree with you. One more thing I want to add here, Nick and Iman, essentially is logs are post facto. They're awesome. You need to have them. You need logs. You need
Mm.
context added to the logs. Absolutely, all of that is true. That's the bare minimum you need. But they're post facto. Stuff has already happened, and stuff has probably, and that's why it is logged somewhere. Some anomaly is logged somewhere, or something is logged somewhere because at least a part of that has already happened, really, or in all of it has really happened in terms of malicious actions. Logs are beautiful, context is awesome, but you need something more, which gets you more visibility into the kill chain as it is evolving. You see what I'm saying? Like, hey, can I catch this at ingress traffic level? Can I say that, hey, there is a log4j dot, a log4j is super boring, but let's just say log4j dot jar in a container that's running, and you know that you have to run the business, you allow that image to run, and then now you're saying, okay, if something funny happens, I know I'm going to see some artifacts, probably in the logs or somewhere, somewhere, not necessarily logs, but somewhere on the system. But by then, the damage might already be done. So the way I would see you have tighter control on detection response, or really you're really responding to stuff early on in the kill chain, is by looking at things in addition to logs, things like what comes in, what goes out, and what changes. Really,
Mm.
you're looking at things like ingress traffic, you're looking at egress traffic, you're looking at syscall and stuff like that. We like to call it packet accurate detection and response, or syscall accurate detection and response, really,
Yeah.
right? So You've got to do all of this too if you really want to, get a handle on things early on. In addition to logs, so logs are good, they're essential, but they're not sufficient. You need more, and the more really comes from tooling like this, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. The logs are the table stakes, but they will not alone provide you the context
Yeah.
to detect even a medium sophistication breach in this space, in my experience.
Yeah, it's like logs by default are reactive. Logs with automation can be proactive. Automation that is built that only provides half of what it needs to eradicate an attacker is still reactive. And this is the reality of detection and response, regardless whether it's in Kubernetes or not. As I notice, like, look, let's be real. 30 years later, people still, struggle with detecting and responding to attackers in real time. It's almost impossible with existing environments. It's almost even more impossible with Kubernetes due to its ephemeral nature. Things are spun up, they're spun down. If you don't have the proactive capabilities to, weed out an attacker as it occurs, their team is never going to be able to identify what happened. It's like showing to a crime scene after the crime has already occurred. And today, that's what detection and response is. You show up, you read the logs. Oh my God, there may be a threat. Let me escalate it to my tier 2. Oh my God, this is probably an incident. Let me escalate to my tier 3. Holy crap, this is an incident. Let's just figure out what happened and how to respond to it. So yeah, I always say, like, this is, again, we keep emphasizing this, over decades, when I was early as a systems engineer, younger, like all these time periods, I remember we keep emphasizing the need that developers really own security in their workloads, because the way that we're headed from a technology perspective is there will never be a time where reactive teams can effectively respond to attackers. It has to happen upstream. It has to happen through strong preventive controls. It has to happen through the ability to rapidly take, in this environment, ephemeral infrastructure and create automation that can hopefully, mitigate and manage the attack surface, or what do you call it, the impact of an attacker. Actually, what's interesting about this question is cloud provider logs. So cloud has been really interesting for a lot of folks. I talk to a lot of people, even now. I mean, come on, like when I was a lot younger, I used to work, with cloud providers way back in the day. And I mean, many years later, we're people are still struggling to wrap their heads around cloud and what that means. I think what's interesting about cloud is it was basically it was a chance to pioneer something really new for the world, which we have. It's so many, AWS, Microsoft, Google, everyone has made leaps and bounds with the innovation that has happened in cloud. I mean, people have been able to build things like, take a look at Spotify's year-end recommendations thing that uses AI to identify your favorite music and creates videos around it and all that stuff. That would have never been possible pre-cloud, and so cloud has really allowed people to build really innovative stuff. But what's been challenging also is that when cloud is growing so fast, without logging standards that are truly enforced, a lot of products may get built without having the same exact logging verbosity and also aligning to what a security team needs. They might have all the observability data, but they might not have all of the relevant data that a security team needs to be able to map to, like, TTPs and identify if a threat has occurred. So how do we, this is a crazy question because I don't really see an answer here, but how do we get the industry to align on a common type of logging verbosity, or logging criteria? I know government has, some standards and stuff that allows people that have to secure these deployments to be able to do their jobs better.
That's that's a very interesting question, Iman. And I think, like as you mentioned, it's a it's a crazy one at that. I'll tell you, I wish there was one thing we could do to make everyone sort of aligned to this. But I think ultimately, no matter that one thing that gets defined, I think it's going to be always about adding deeper context. Because look, logs are there, people are logging stuff their own way with certain verbosity. Is that enough though? And when is it going to be enough? It's going to be enough when you have more actionable context. For example, just look at the Log4j thing again, really, right? Well, I don't wish there was a new Log4j, but I wish we had a different sort of example to sort of discuss. But really, if you could log in, if you had SBOM, software bill of materials for everything at that point in time, and every log, every suspicious or behavior, suspicious or even the regular logs really was logged with saying that, hey, this is coming in from log4j.jar, and here is the context. And the context basically means this is in this sort of a container, which is actually running. That basically tells you log4j was loaded in memory, it was doing things, it was sort of being accessed, it was in this particular container. You're really adding more and more context to go more, it's just a funny thing. You're adding more and more context to go narrower. And narrower basically means you're going to be able to do something about it, right? You're going to be able to act upon it, really, right? So logging format is one thing. No matter what logging format we come up with, I think it should have certain sort of, think of it as, essential sort of fields that you sort of always put into the logs, really, right? One could be SBOM, like I said. The other one could be, about the network context, which pod you belong to, stuff like that, really. No matter the format, I think it will be about the context, is how I look at it. I know it's a pretty open-ended question, and we're not going to be able to define what the solution should be at this point in time. But my take, or I would bet on adding more context would be the solution, or get us closer to the solution, really, right? To make logs more actionable.
My take on this is slightly different, Sandeep. I'd like to share it.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
I think if we start with the end in mind of how do detection and response engineers actually respond and triage a alert based on a signal, and we think about the threat model for what we want to find, and then work backwards from there with that threat model to what required log sources are necessary for us to satisfy the ability to detect that threat model with a signal, send to a detection and response engineer, or send to us an automation platform to handle. With the threat model in mind, we can work our way backwards to what logs are necessary.
Absolutely, Nick. I mean, this is why I love chatting with you. I totally agree now. It makes total sense. It could be signals coming in from, let's say, MITRE ATT&CK, right? Or MITRE
Right.
defense, or anything of that sort. And we say, hey, look, you need to put these signals into this log. So I'm going to grab those later and model it. Absolutely. That is beautiful. That makes total sense.
Yeah, yeah, this is really important because a lot of developers that are building applications, they define which logs, how logs are written, and what will be logged and captured in a log. And if poor logging hygiene is taken in the beginning of an application being developed, if there's not logs for all of the abuse cases that are identified in the threat model, and if they're not effectively threat modeling, and they're missing all that data, you're basically missing signal for a team to be able to even build an automation around, triaging and responding to that abuse case. So it's almost equally as important for
that reason, Iman, sorry to jump in. It's very necessary for security teams to be involved in the definition of the log sources, and it's very necessary for the security teams to be involved in the definition of daemons to then capture the runtime monitoring, right? Like when we went out to go do this at Snap, we had to have the highest level conversations with the platform engineering teams that are building our Kubernetes service mesh, like at the highest level, at like the CTO level, basically, describing why this is necessary, what this means, what are the fault modes for it, where's the big red button if it goes wrong, meaning the daemon that is responsible for the log observability as a sidecar deployment. Like what if it fills up memory and now affects the stability of the cluster? Like what do we do? What's the escape path there?
Yeah, that's that. It's I was thinking about you when I was getting here because I know that you all have a very strong security champion team, and you all have embedded security uh, deep in the development life cycle with folks. And obviously you have a very strong collaboration with your CTO so that, if there are new mandates around logging requirements, logging verbosity, all that sort of stuff, that, as people are getting hired, the compliance, quote unquote, is already sort of laid out for them as they build and write applications.
Yeah.
The reason why this is also good is because, it also allows the nonprofits like MITRE to build effective TTP frameworks because, some people, for example, and this is the power of MITRE ATT&CK, is some people have additional TTPs past MITRE ATT&CK, like Google, for example. We have the YouTube infrastructure, we have the cloud infrastructure, we're a cloud service provider. So our TTPs can be even more different. Than we've got a lot more abuse stuff and MITRE plus plus plus. But for a lot of people, MITRE captures the majority of like how an attacker does recon and triage and initial triage, all that, or initial access, and all of the different stages of the life cycle of an attacker navigating through an environment. But in Kubernetes deployments, so now we have MITRE ATT&CK for Kubernetes. I think it got released last year.
Mhm.
This is super powerful because what it does is they tried to demystify the need for security engineers to have to build this what type of logs are commonly accessible that I should be able to identify this type of adversary tactic, and this technique. And that's the power of it, is that it then makes it easier for us to build solutions that can take TTPs alongside the associated logs, and hopefully try to build a lot of automations around our tools like CSPM and even our detection and response tools to mitigate this in the first place.
Yeah, I just posted, by the way, what Iman is talking about. This is a very, very powerful mechanism to reason about the log coverage that you need to then reason about the signals that you would nominally want to collect from such an environment.
Yeah,
We
thanks for
might
sharing.
have together solve this problem, Nick, isn't it? The question that sounded crazy doesn't sound crazy anymore, right, Nick? Thanks so much for adding that color, right?
Yeah.
Basically working backwards from TTPs and adding some more context, and you have things that are deep enough, actionable enough, with the exact TTP. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's always really helpful, and I love how you guys had both individually laid out the journey of securing Kubernetes deployments. It's always so helpful for any security practitioner, whether they're a full-time security practitioner or whether they're just a developer who's also now the security lead for the product, to truly understand, like, what is I have an idea, and now my idea turned into a feature, and we started to then code the feature, and then we started to build it into our CI/CD. What is the process of everything end to end in a container-based environment, so that I understand all the different possibilities at each stage of this? So I'm not just someone, for example, this happens a lot in security operations. I'm an analyst, and all I know is the world of being an analyst. I see logs, I investigate logs. But the world before that, development life cycle, is kind of like rocket science to me. It's always super important that everyone understands the framing of what exactly happens when, even if their job is right here, so that they understand how it all sort of comes and ties in together. So when they build solutions with the context in mind of maybe where there may be blind spots upstream, or where the downstream teams might need some more context to be able to do their jobs better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Watch the full webinar at deepfence.io/resources.